the attendees to the conference go in through WOWA.
WOWA, yes. Okay.
And we are through Zoom. So don't feel bad that we have so little people.
That's okay.
No, actually, probably you will have many more.
I try to actually go in via WOWA, but it says it doesn't work with my browser, and I didn't want to install a new browser 15 minutes before the talk. I thought that was a bit.
And in fact, in WOWA, you just hear yourself. You're gonna do almost anything except post questions.
Okay, well, because I mean, I have a browser window of WOWA open in parallel, so I was wondering whether there's some kind of a chat or so, and to interact with people.
There's a message that we are already being heard by everybody. So.
Oh, that's good. So we should avoid that, or will they switch it off?
No. The thing is, we cannot do it, I guess.
Okay, so that means we need to be polite now. That will be easier for you than for me.
Yeah. No. For me, I always, I'm crazy. I always say whatever I don't need to say.
Just quickly, my understanding is this is a general community. It's not all security and privacy people. It's all over the field of information processing. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's a general conference, and we have 1,200 people registered. They are not attending to all the events, but we have lots of people, and there are many students also.
That's okay, but then I think I should be prepared, because I have certain introductory slides which give a bit of background on security and privacy. That would be boring if it was just a security community, but I understanding it's a keynote of the general event. So then I should be prepared reasonably properly then, yes. And at some point in time, I probably should start screen sharing. Is that a good moment now?
Yeah, maybe we can try it.
That should be, let's give it a try. That should be working.
We have 3 minutes more to start.
So that's, but it's a good idea to try out some of these things. So so the audience will see the screens, and they will also see me on camera, or what will they see?
Yeah, they will see you, and they will see your screen, and they will hear you.
Okay, so that should be then we should be reasonably prepared. And I now also see the chat of Zoom, but that is only the limited number of people that you said. And is there a chat in WOWA that I can look at in parallel, possibly, or is that, because there is a lot of stuff in WOWA?
I think the questions come in through the Q&A, and you have a chat below also.
In WOWA?
No, in here, in Zoom.
In Zoom. Okay. So they're coming in from moderators, basically. Okay. So
see, we are asking to start in 1 more minute.
In one more minute, that's okay for me.
I will present you in Spanish, because they gave me the bio in Spanish, but don't worry, I will say whatever you put in.
I don't know what I put in actually, but it will be something. Cut it short if you think it's too long, probably.
Okay. You are prepared to talk for how long?
45 minutes, I was told, and then 15 minutes questions. That was my briefing.
Great. Do you have a clock, or do you need to remind you?
I have a clock, but maybe a reminder is always good, just in case.
Okay. 5 minutes?
5 minutes, 10 minutes before is maybe a good idea then.
Okay. Okay. Let us start. It's 8:40. I am very glad to welcome Dr. Kai Renenberg. He will present a keynote to celebrate the 60th anniversary of IFEP. IFEP is, if you don't know, is the International Federation for Information Processing. It was created by UNESCO 60 years ago to try to help the technology transfer from the West to the East during the Cold War. Right now, this is not as necessary as 60 years ago, but IFEP is doing a great job trying to disseminate the technology creation and the science creation in the countries to less developed countries. That's why Kai has offered this keynote, and I really welcome him. I will present Kai in Spanish. He will be talking in English, his presentation. So, Kai Ranneberg ocupa la cátedra Deutsche Telekom de Negocios Móviles y Seguridad Multilateral en la Universidad Goethe de Frankfurt desde el 2002. Antes de trabajar en Microsoft Research Cambridge, Reino Unido, se centró en dispositivos de seguridad personal y tecnologías de privacidad. Kai estudió en la TU de Berlín y recibió su doctorado en la Universidad de Friburgo, donde luego coordinó el programa interdisciplinario College Security in Communication Technology, patrocinado por Gottlieb Daimler and Carl Benz Foundation, que investiga la seguridad multilateral. Desde 1991, Kai participa activamente en la estandarización ISO/IEC de seguridad y criterios de TI desde marzo del 2007 en tecnologías de gestión de identidad y privacidad. Preside el Technical Committee 11 de IFEP, seguridad y protección de la privacidad de los sistemas de procesamiento de información. Kai preside la red de interés especial para asuntos jurídicos y de seguridad del Consejo de las Sociedades Europeas de Informática Profesionales, CEPIS, desde el 2003. En julio del 2004, Kai fue nombrado experto académico del Consejo de Administración de la Agencia Europea de Seguridad de las Redes y la Información en ISA. Él tiene muchos premios, entre los que podemos citar el IFEP Silver Core, el premio de la disertación de la Fundación Alcatel-Cell y el Friedrich August van Haken Prize de la Universidad de Freiburg y el Deutsche Bank. Por muchos años, Kai ha sido parte del Board of Directors de IFEP. Él nos va a hablar sobre seguridad y privacidad en la era de Internet de las Cosas. Los dispositivos conectados, a menudo llamados como Internet de las Cosas, cubren cada vez más aspectos de la vida personal y también los procesos públicos y comerciales, por ejemplo, en asistencia domiciliaria y fabricación inteligente, la industria 4.0. A menudo se involucran procesos críticos para la seguridad, como el control de vehículos e infraestructuras críticas, y se procesan datos muy sensibles. Estos desarrollos exigen atención a los aspectos de seguridad y privacidad que a menudo no todos los jugadores comprenden. Esta charla discutirá algunos ejemplos de Internet de las Cosas y los respectivos problemas de seguridad y privacidad. Cuando corresponda, el Dr. Ranneberg dará algunas pistas sobre los enfoques de soluciones técnicas, organizativas, regulatorias y estratégicas, o la falta de los mismos. Con esto le doy la palabra a Kai. Él estará presentando en inglés, desafortunadamente. Espero que todos lo puedan disfrutar. Gracias. Kai, you are in now.
Okay. Gabriela, muchas gracias. Muchas gracias por la invitación très honorable et la salutations très amicable. And that's about everything that I can speak in Spanish, and that's why this talk is going to continue in English. You don't want to hear my German accent, it's Spanish. So this talk, as Gabriela has told, is about security and privacy in IoT. The idea is to structure it in 3 areas, as you've seen maybe in the title. It is IoT age in smart homes. So what happens as home with regard to IoT? We start at the, let's say it's a place where the complexity is lowest. We'll continue and go into larger organizations, especially factories and companies. And then we go further to public life and also to related governance and questions when it comes to security. The idea is that the further we go, the more we go, of course, go away from the detail, but we start with some details in an area that is an area that is hopefully known to everybody, us, because we all have a home. First, at the beginning, there's a little bit of security and privacy, because I understand that not all of you are security and privacy and aficionados every day. So that is the beginning of it. And finally, because your German professor is talking to you, there's a summary and an outlook. I lose my pension if I don't give a summary and an outlook. So, and security and privacy, there is a number of ways how you can structure them. And let's have a look at these two structural elements and also at some of these colors that will come back in a moment back. There is a human discrepancy that is on the one side, when you have privacy, you would like to actually keep things for yourself. On the other side, and when you are in an environment with other people, you try to gain trust of partners to do something together in a community. So you have this protect your own sphere on the one side, and you have this gaining of trust on the other side. That's what you see as a human discrepancy that is underlying all of these questions. And people with a technology and background have over time agreed on 4 major features, and that I hope you can see on the slides here. And that's what I call technical arrangement. And these are the facets of security. They overlap to some degree, and they're also not free of contradictions. And that's what you already at this moment in time you have to consider. But let's have a look at them first. Confidentiality is one of the goals, that you want to make sure that information is only going to those to whom it is intended. When you think about your household, not every family discussion should go and should arrive everywhere on the internet possibly, or especially in healthcare information is something that you may want to keep for yourself. Integrity, you don't want to have information manipulated of systems. Just think about a car or another IoT device that is suddenly behaving differently than you actually wanted to have it behaving. And we've seen videos of cars going elsewhere than they were supposed to go. And so that's another security goal. Availability, somehow related to integrity, but something on its own. You don't want to lose data. You don't want to have the system totally failing you. And we see that when suddenly now, for example, this conference system would break down, and we wouldn't be able to log in, we would have an availability problem. And then last but not least, accountability. It's important that for many security goals that you know who has done what and who has been and who is responsible for which kind of things. And here you already see there is can be a contradiction, or you need to balance and blend these properties properly, because confidentiality and privacy means that maybe you're not being taught down for everything that ever you've done. On the other side, obviously for important things, I already see a question there which about responsibility for vulnerabilities. Obviously, then it's important to know who's doing what. So in the end, what we need is a combination of technical, organizational, and legal methods. Just that security in a nutshell. Now, and let's look into digitalization and what has digitalization to us or is doing digitalization. And IoT is, of course, one example of digitalization and progressing digitalization. So what effects do you have on digitalization? And what effects do they have on information processing and communication, but also on security and privacy? You remember these 4 colors that I was using for the confidentiality, for the integrity, for the availability, and for the accountability. And let's see what is easier, what is more difficult. What we all know is in digitalization, it's much easier and faster to multiply and copy things and to distribute things. And that has an effect on integrity and confidentiality, especially because what is more difficult and sometimes even impossible is to delete things or to limit data flows. So what was before we had digitalization was rather difficult. You know, printing is in high art and was a lot of investment. That is now much easier. And deleting something and limiting things, that is much harder. So we have with regard to confidentiality and to and availability, we have these issues. Nice for availability, sometimes not so good for confidentiality. We have other elements where it's relatively clear to which security parts they go, modifying something. That obviously has to do on the one side with an integrity. On the other side, it also has to do with an accountability. Modifying is much easier and faster. You know, when you had in the old days when you had a handwritten text and you needed to rewrite it to do some changes, lots of work. Nowadays, you just edit quickly. So that's easier. What's still difficult and impossible, and you find that again and again, it's much more difficult to distinguish originals and copies. It is much more difficult to recognize and detect any kind of changes or manipulations. And in the IoT world, that is interesting because let's assume you have this car and then somebody's changing the software. So there is a challenge there. And it's also much more difficult to recognize originators. So these are the things that we should keep in mind when we look at our examples and see what do we think about security and privacy in certain scenarios. Then there is a number of other things which don't have a real or direct relation to security and privacy, but of course they're also important. Searching, sorting, analyzing, that's what we all do in informatics and computer science, and we have computers for that because things are much easier. And comprehending and checking processing and see what step happened after which step, understanding what is going on, the more complex our computer systems get, the more difficult, and some people say impossible, this is actually going to get. So that has an impact on security and privacy in general. So this was your security and privacy introduction. And let's go into some examples, and let's start with the smart home. And let's start with an hour ago, when maybe some of you were getting up, 7:40 a.m., and some of you have been drinking coffee, and perfect coffee, as I was able to experience in Costa Rica, clearly. And here we have a coffee machine that is making coffee or can make coffee for you. And it can be coffee machines always existed, but now your coffee machine can actually be controlled by an app. I don't know how many of you maybe have such a coffee machine or a similar coffee machine. Here's a coffee machine, here's a tablet, here is an app. And what is a smart or nice things about that? And one thing that especially friends of mine who have this like, and you can pre-program your coffee machine, and we're starting the morning with coffee machine working, not with alarm clock working. Alarm clock working will come later, but before the alarm clock is even working you up, your coffee is already being prepared at 7:40, and you can say in the evening and maybe from your bed on, and you can say what kind of coffee do you want to have at which point in time. Now, as we're security and privacy people, we are not interested in the coffee. We're interested in looking on what kind of information is actually being processed and where is it processed in the long run. And a little bit on infrastructure, some of you probably know this. And why is this app working with the coffee machine? In usual cases, it is actually the coffee machine is on the internet. The app is a smartphone that is on the internet, and usually it's not a local network that you would have. That would be an interesting idea over which they're communicating, but usually they're communicating over some kind of server. At least that is the current paradigm. We want to later think whether that is the best paradigm, but that is a paradigm. So your app is logging into somewhere at Philips or Seiko in this case of an example, and then you're ordering your coffee for the next morning, and that information is arriving at your coffee machine, and then your coffee is being started to prepare. So what does one learn? One learns about how much coffee are you consuming at which point in time, and also at which point in time are you actually doing coffee. Daily routines are being learned. If you think about on who's learning that and what are the conditions, let's have a quick look here. And we're not going to 6 pages for data protection here, not at 8 o'clock in the morning or at 7 o'clock in the morning. Nobody does that, actually, only very few people. But we're putting out one point here, and that tells you something about the dependability. This is the conditions of Philips and Seiko, which are not the worst of all conditions with regard to this. They say this app will not work without collecting the data. If you don't want to share this information, you will not be able to use the app, full stop. So that is basically when you want to have this. If you want to have your coffee and if you want to have it via this system, then you need to share certain data with the operator, whether you like or not, in the current architectures as we have them. Let's go further for the smart home with Internet of Things. There is an alarm clock here. This is an alarm clock, not like the one that existed when I was going to school, but this is an alarm clock that comes, of course, with an app. And it's nice because it doesn't have this very noisy something. It tells me nicely, hey, it's time to get up now. So, and it also tells me over the app and how my sleep was. Good mix of deep and light sleep. And it tells me, it learns about my sleep rhythm, my sleeping habits. And again, the conditions are pretty much the same, in this case, different company. And if I want to know all of that, and if I want to get a wake up that fits to the way how I slept, and I need to share that in the common infrastructure architectures. Now we have something that is only working for some of you, but for some of it is interesting. You will need to shave, and maybe your shaving foam is running out. And of course, with Internet of Things, immediately buying new foam for shaving is possible. And what does it tell? Information about, again, your daily routine. When are you shaving, and your preferred products? Some of us are going on a daily basis to a balance. Some of them are avoiding that. And of course, that is also now coming with an app that gives all kinds of information for you. And your balance is an Internet of Things element. It tells you all kinds of services together with it. Next one is cleaning teeth. And again, you can, and sorry for the German here, but it basically tells you, and hey, we have a perfect program for you how to brush your teeth in the best way after you've analyzed how you're brushing your teeth, how long you're doing it, all of that. Eventually, okay, in 10 minutes, you want to be at the conference. So 8:30 locking door, leaving the house in case it's not a virtual conference for you. And another lock, another internet, and another daily routine, and information about persons in the household is being learned. And this is more for the colder part of the world. And you may want to put down the heating, otherwise maybe it is an air condition, because when nobody is at home, then you can switch that down and maybe ask for that to be automatically. And maybe switch on the lights is also something. You've maybe seen the company names. There are quite a few of them, all of them doing something, and not necessarily one or the other is better than the others. There are more examples and more devices. And children devices also exist. This is a door that is an Internet of Things device with smart recognition of language, and also an internet connection so that your child can talk to the door. And if you think there's something like the private, that is already since several patents in Japan also connected to the internet. So all kinds of functionality around this one is happening. There's only one that you need to do yourself. Everything else can be analyzed, and in case you're sick, help can come. That is interesting for people who want to help the elderly. So what do we see? We see lots of examples. We see the Internet of Things arriving at home, and we've seen the first graphs of data protection and data flows first. And what does that mean? We have usually these days strong connectivity. Data are flowing fast. We have a control via some apps. Some of them are specialized. And we have data stored usually in the cloud or with third parties. We've seen that from the one example. These clouds are usually globally distributed, and you can come to them via your provider server. Sometimes, but not always, the app and the device are coming from the same provider. That is interesting when it's about responsibility if something is going wrong. Data protection terms and conditions are usually much harder to understand than to use the app in itself. The app is made to be very easy to use. And then there is 6, 12, whatever pages to read to understand what is happening with the data flow. So that's why we have this talk, and we take a look. In the smart home, you have usually something which let's call network architecture. There's 2 types of network architectures. There are the ones that maybe you've built anyway, and then somehow your device is connecting to what you have. Most of you probably have a wireless LAN infrastructure at home, or many of you, that is somehow connected to the internet. And then there is a number of devices, TVs, toothbrushes, and all of what we've seen there somehow can connect to your wireless LAN, or sometimes to your LAN, but usually it's wireless LAN, and then they connect to the internet and offer their services. Whether you can filter information that is taken from these devices to here, and how you control that, maybe control that via your wireless LAN, is something that you need to be very good and understand unless you have specific architectures. There are some architectures designed for that. Why? And because all of these devices are computers. We've seen some of them failing. I don't know how many of you have not rebooted your network router in the last few weeks, at least once or twice or so. And many of these devices have lots of software in them, but it's not very much tested. Very often when you have an update, you don't even notice that. And so there's not super much transparency in these kind of things here. So what are other examples that we have that are happening to maybe make your life more convenient and to enable electronic commerce? And those of you who are standardizing Bluetooth, and for example, or in Bluetooth, and working on the web, there's a Bluetooth web API. That is nice because your website can in future and look not into your browser, like what browser features do you have. It can also look into what kind of devices are actually connected in your household and what are they doing. Do they have specific limits? And should maybe the light on the screen be put up a bit high and lighter because one of your light bulbs is broken? So, and some people say my website is knowing something about the computer that I'm serving with, and with this API, and your whole household can be known to the website, unless you say you don't want that. Another nice example is assuming you're watching TV and you have this and one of these ultrasonic cross device tracking and enabled, and that can be sitting in your TV, and it can listen to sound that is coming from, for example, maybe from your mobile phone, your smartphone. That is with a smartphone, you're sitting in front of your TV, and your smartphone is maybe sending some of your information that it knows because it's your smartphone, and the TV can use that information and can transmit it to the provider of the TV program, and maybe then you get advertisements that fit to your situation because your smartphone knows about you. Why shouldn't your advertisement provider and your TV provider know either? So all of this is possible. Some people like it, some people don't like it. What we have is a policy problem, and that is also why, and let's say, for example, the experts in IFIP are concerned about it. The classic policy is usually in an old paradigm. Collect all of the information that you can have. We will say to see a paradigm of data is in your oil, and let's see what we do with it. The classic security and privacy paradigm is actually to say, what do we do with the data, and then let's see whether we need it, and then we make an educated decision. Educated decisions do not happen so very much in this scenario, unfortunately. Next thing is you have electrical devices, and you may have a smart meter that meters your electricity, and there is some literature here, Molina Markham, for example, if you can meter electricity provisioning, and in 50 slots, that means that you can basically see whether somebody's at home when they're sleeping, they have meal times. 1 minute slots will be 1 minute slots will be cold and see whether you have cold and hot breakfast, because I can see how much your heater is using, or maybe your coffee machine or whatever. Washing machine and operation can be seen with that. And children alone at home, TV times is interesting. And with half second slots, one can identify your TV program, because and depending on whether it's light or dark, your TV is using more and more or less electricity. That is, again, must be a very fine meter that is metering your electricity transmission in 0.5 seconds. But it works for the whole household, because one knows your refrigerator, of course, usually it needs electricity every 15 minutes or so. When you open it more often, it needs more electricity more often, but it's a very valid and very regular pattern. And that holds also for your washing machine, of course. When it starts, and other things. There are some architectures to try to give you some control on what information is going outside. Nest is a company owned by Google. KiwiCon is in consortium by a major telecom operator in Google, together with some holders providers. But there's still a challenge to get these kind of things done. Let's see what can we do to have principles to protect ourselves in these areas. So we've seen now there are some challenges. And what can one do? What are typical protection paradigms from security to try to help you? First thing is aggregation. And this picture here is not just because it's a household cooking device, but it's if you mesh data in some way and make sure that they don't come in all detail, then of course you can have some protection. So a typical security and protection paradigm is an aggregate data before they're being analyzed. You can do that maybe by having more users and after one smart meter, or you can have it by making the accounting terms longer. Half a second is obviously quite telling a lot. 15 minutes is telling less. And maybe let's see, what do you really need for an electricity provisioning? So aggregation is a security strategy or a privacy strategy. Next strategy is unlinkability. We have a coin here. A coin is one of those credentials that it always existed for thousands of years. And it basically means you can pay cash, and nobody can usually follow that up unless they maybe look at your fingerprints or so. But a coin is paying without traces. And one way to get more protection here and unlinkability is try to remove the link between the electricity consumer and the payer. Maybe payment can come with vouchers, not directly from an account. Maybe you get some credentials, also vouchers that show, hey, you have an authorization to receive electricity, but it's not that every bit and piece is to be measured. It just say, hey, you have this authorization. And also, of course, you can say maybe there is something that is and coming in and giving you as a voucher, and that can be interesting, of course, for at home, but it can also be interesting when you have a smart car that needs to be recharged and somebody needs to pay for that. At the moment, very often you get recharging for free, but that will not stay. So we need something like that. Next element that is a security element is an identity management. Basically make a decision on yourself or be enabled which of the information from yourself you can and you want to give away. There are standards for that. An ISO in this case, an organization that IFIP is also liaising with, has produced a so-called framework for identity management. The good thing is the first one, and the current version is even available for free. And the main point is here, and to be clear about what is happening. The first thing is identity is something different than identifier. Identity are your properties, are the attributes that you have. Identifier means is it exactly you. This is your name, this is your passport number, maybe your account number. And maybe you have certain properties and certain interests, and they can be fulfilled, but you do not necessarily need to be showing up as individual. So the point is presenting yourself in the appropriate fashion. That's identity management that can protect you, reduce the in risk of over-identification. Gender is an interesting question here. Maybe you've experienced that people are sometimes treated differently than when on the other side, the person knows which gender you have. We don't have times for juicy examples on this, but I think you maybe have experienced some examples yourself. Another thing that you can do is, and that goes in line with identity management, is take some influence by what in signatures and credentials can be done and can be done maybe at home. So this looks a bit maybe like your identity card, names, date of birth, all these kind of things. If you are in control of this card, and even if it has security and cryptography, you can show only parts of it. Like, for example, maybe when you want to show that you're over 18 or have a certain age and to get a certain privilege, you can maybe only show your name and your birth date, or maybe only your birth date. Or you cannot show your birth date because that may be a basis for discrimination, and you just show where you come from. So this is selective disclosure. This is the advertising one of our research projects has been working on, that it was called credential. Another example again for how can you protect yourself possibly in the Internet of Things area, your smartphone, of course. And could be good if your iPhone store would tell you more. This is a German example, and it is, but basically the pictures are important for you. You see this traffic light, yellow, red, green, and it could tell you something about all of these apps that you have in your app store and how privacy friendly they are. And interestingly, this is an example that we did some time ago with an flashlight and torch apps in your smartphone. That was before they were automatically included. You would think that no data needs to be transferred when you have an app that pulls on the light on your smartphone. No, many of them are actually, maybe they're just acting like Trojan horses. They give you an extra feature, but they're delivering all kinds of information that has nothing to do with your smartphone, and they deliver that to the provider of the app. Also, of course, there are other things that you could be informed about, like, okay, you have a certain music taste at home, and you have your wonderful speaker, and the way how you choose your music usually gives quite some in idea on where you and how old you are, which gender you have. Usually quite a few things can be found out. Further things can be on your smartphone, what are they doing, and one can analyze that. So another thing is you go to a website, and we've seen many of the IoT devices are going to a website. Websites promise that you treat your privacy properly. But again, we saw website policy reading is a long story. 6 pages, 7 pages, maybe for every household device. And again, a traffic light could be something useful. And we're doing some research on saying, okay, these are dimensions of an IoT and other internet usage, protection of children, data collection, data aggregation. And obviously green means this seems to be quite okay. And yellow seems better take a closer look. And red says, okay, maybe this is actually a major problem here. And if there's a privacy breach, that could be shown to you. So these are examples to make life easier. If you think about the background of that usually works with analyzing the promises. And it's also an example how maybe you can make artificial intelligence working for you by extruding the policies, that is what the providers promise, and analyzing that at home. If you don't trust it, there's a very old strategy also. You see this is a sensor that is controlling your movement or doing your movement. If you don't want to have delivered on the internet and how you're moving and to show people that you're not sportive enough, maybe you can use a household device that again that is thing, and now you are actually more fit than you, and then you are sweaty, and then you can move forward with that. So that's another protection mechanism, obviously more a protection mechanism that is not super technical, but one that can also work. So this was a household. Let's have a look how we are we for time. 30 minutes are gone, and let's have a look now with a bit and faster speed into large organizations. So what do we have in Industry 4.0, for example, or in smart manufacturing? And what you have is, of course, and manufacturer companies, and they have manufacturing devices. And what you have standard IT connecting to it. This is a tablet, maybe even a standard tablet. You have the machines controlling standard IT controlling machine. You have it connecting to machine, and you have machines calling their manufacturer. So home for maintenance and things like that. What are the trends and challenges that you see in the IoT world in factories? 5 dimensions, or can we actually, should be 5 here, sorry for that. 5 perspectives we can distinguish. The first thing is connectivity, consumerization, value chain, technical security, business security. So this is connectivity. This is not exactly a factory, but it's an aircraft. But I like this picture so much, I wanted to show it to you. It's your laptop. It's a standard device, and in this case, it would connect to your Airbus, an aircraft, and then you have a connection done technically. Obviously, the Airbus shouldn't work like that, and of course, Airbus tells us they don't have that issue anymore, or never had that issue. But quite a few machines in factories do have that issue, because what they usually have is many of these machines and are coming from times before the internet existed. So people were happy if they could make some kind of connection to the machine, that connection would maybe end up to a local network that is becoming an internet network, and wasn't necessarily to be assumed. On the other side, because we have all of these standard IT devices, all kinds of standard software is arriving. And now you have these kind of elements. You maybe have also some smart workpieces that have internet by themselves, and they're talking to machines. And so from that point of view, of interfaces, and interfaces, and each of these interfaces actually need to be controlled properly. Consumerization, you probably have seen bring your own device as a trend, and as a very popular trend, because the old idea of corporate-owned, business-only devices, Kobo is expensive for companies. Everybody says it's much nicer if people can come with their own devices, and it's cheaper for the company, and people know, especially young people, can play with their smartphones in the company and use something. The problem is who's actually going to control this. So that's what we see as trend, and we need to consider that. The next thing is value chains. And what we see as a security point, we've seen this, and the consumer devices coming in, and the consumer devices are followed by the consumer companies. Apple is going from iPhone into manufacturing TVs in future, of course, or having architectures for TV. Smartphones are doing that. Google is doing a self-driving car. 3D printers are coming from internet companies. And again, we have this, going to think about technical security. We have the old devices, and we have the new internet and connection. And if you look into business security, you have the old devices connected with some device configuration and based on experience, and you have some sensitive information, of course, in devices. You have maybe what have your customers delivered, ordered. You have load factors and machine utilization. You have product planning information, and where do the machines are delivering that. So these are the challenges. What do you have to deal with that? You have some architectures, you have some standardization, you have some strategies available on that. So this is a typical architecture that comes from the internet world, and you don't need to look at too much at the details, but you see a platform tier, an edge tier, and an enterprise tier. And what you see in the middle is a service platform. And yes, this is very much looking like a cloud. This is looking how the internet world is looking into factories and devices. They're basically at the edge, somewhere on the side, maybe like a 3D printer. factory people are looking at these kind of architectures very differently. They say the organization of my company, of my factory, of my workplace is important. That's why you have so many layers here about work centers, about control devices, about information. And this is basically how a company is organized and how a workplace is organized. These architectures at the moment are competing for your, and let's say for attention. And both of them are fighting. We're not going to go into details here, but you can see that different architectures are moving and sometimes colliding. And that is relevant. What does that mean when you're in the world of Internet of Things and have a factory to deal with? And what is important for you and to look at in this digital transformation? And let's start with an important point is actually, especially when you have a manufacturing process, you want to keep understanding it. And you want to, what you're good at, try to preserve that. You want to have systems that you can rely on. And special things, again, to look at data flows. We've already seen data flows in the households that become important again. Software update for heterogeneous IT systems is a relevant point here. How do you make sure that when you update something, you understand what's going on? And then the next point is who's owning the data, and that is both for you and your company as users, but it could also be for your customers. Think about maybe you're producing devices that are directly customized to the customer, or just goods like maybe shoes that have photos of your customers on them, or maybe a medical device that has all of kinds of data of the body of the patient in it, and to help, and that could even be something that helps with your teeth. All of that is relevant to be kept. One element that you can deal with, and that is what we are doing somewhere, is in bring your own device scenarios. How do you make sure that the smartphone is some kind of under control? And again, you can say, let's analyze the smartphone by some system that can maybe be used by the IT in the household. So much for the company. Let's go to public life and governance. This is a city. And obviously, cities, many things are happening. If you are interested in understanding how a city works, you try to collect data. So that's basically what many interested parties would like to know. They would like to know what is happening in the city. That is what they say. We went Internet of Things, smart devices, and devise something. So how are they collecting that? Well, citizens are sensors. This is London. This is a smartphone with a sensor. And just think what you're doing with your smartphone. Maybe you're passing by certain shops. You're checking in maybe at your bank. You're getting an overview. And the relation between your city and your citizen and the city or the municipality is very nicely documented. That's great from a point of view if you want to inform people that something is going wrong. Obviously, it tells quite a few things. And social media can also be used as a source of data here because they're sensing. We've seen the sensing of things in the outside, like temperature or whatever. And users are can sharing information anyway. That gives a wonderful mix and cocktail of data. So this is does that mean there's lots of data, and does it mean that we're maybe locked on it? That could be. And the protection on what your device is delivering outside and who's getting it, again, is a challenge. There have been examples where this was maybe too much. This is a German example of where big data services were supposed to be used by Telefonica, and the customer said, hey, we're customers. We don't want to be the data sources. We pay for this, so we want to have that going. That tells us there is some policy involved with this. And there's regulation. This is an example for a European regulation that is in the making. And this is from 2017, and the regulation is still not ready. It's about the so-called e-privacy and regulation, trying to limit what data are being collected. And what kind of discussion we have in public about these kind of things? Well, one thing is obvious is, for example, location data. Who should, under which circumstances, get location data, and how are they being secured? This is now ending in regulation. This is an example for one proposal to politicians. Say, well, should actually in electronic communication data, should location data be available? And should they be part of the electronic communications metadata, or should they be treated extra? The interesting point here was that basically the new internet companies could do something that the telcos could not do. And this idea was originally set out to say, hey, the telcos should also collect the data. Another example is Wi-Fi Bluetooth tracking. We've seen that in the household. And think about that scenario that we've seen in the shopping mall. Does it mean everything that your smartphone emits, Bluetooth data, what kind of data are they supposed to be collected, and can they be used by the shopping mall? So is it the shopping mall automatically allowed to collect your data to improve the analysis of the window shopping and the windows in the shopping mall by seeing how long are you standing in front of it and what are you doing while you're standing in front of the shopping mall? These data could be collected. And is that something that you should be asked before? Or is it something that happens unless you switch off your mobile phone? And what kind of information do you get? There was an idea to say, well, nothing is really needed, expect a little marker somewhere in the corner. And that has created political discussion. And that gets us further into governance and strategy and sovereignty on all of these questions and strategy elements of that. And one element that I wanted to point out here is a new European initiative that is actually discussing many of these questions, so-called European Cybersecurity Competence Network and Center. Meanwhile, the initiative is actually existing. And some of the research projects, and we're involved in one of them, are trying to discuss these kind of issues and shape things. And what is relevant? Many, many different people with different stakeholders are involved. So we can, and it's important to have them all involved. Coverage is important, obviously, all over Europe. And why could this be interesting for you? Maybe because of these 4 areas that we have. How do you organize something like that? How do you make sure that research is going into the right direction? How do you make sure that people are educated about the many, many things that we are and still learning about all of that? And how can people organize themselves? So these 4 areas are relevant. I'm not going to bother you with all of the details because there's only 2 minutes left. But just one example, if you're interested, these are areas, and you see some of them are IoT oriented, maritime transport, smart cities, medical data exchange, supply chain, areas with Internet of Things relevance, where in these kind of cases, the research project is trying to find out how are these things happening and what kind of new research do we need and what kind of new things do we need to be able to protect people. And the new thing here is vanilla research existed before, like cryptography or general security. Security research that is related to applications is happening much less, maybe because people don't want to talk about the weaknesses or so. So one of the goals of this whole strategy project is to say, hey, we need to really look into the applications. And also that you see when it's about skills and education, you find that here. General security education exists a lot. Education that is related to applications and security exists much less. There are some results in CyberSec for Europe, and I'll show you the website where you can read some of them. There are some events, and discussing this is one. If you want to read more about that, you find it on the website document from 2020. These are some future events upcoming in that area. And so if you're interested in how CyberSec communities are organized, there will be something on the evening in Europe, 18th of November. So that should be reasonably convenient for people for a lunch break in Latin America. There will be something on open and agile cities, which have standardization mechanisms for smart cities, and they have security touches. That will be a webinar on that soon. There will be a flagship challenge with an IoT example in terms of shopping and buildings. If you're interested, contact us. And there will be this big general governance conference happening again, and that will be in June 2022. So summary and outlook. This was our picture. What is more important? What is getting easier? What is getting more difficult? You see, it's more and more understanding what is happening, comprehending and checking processes. That is important. What does it tell us as an overall picture? We have expanding and intensified data flows. Data flows are not necessarily good or bad, but they can lead to something, and so that we looked at, and they're definitely critical. Data are the new oil is a picture that, as you've seen from the internet industry, because you need data to do everything. So if you look into history, you will see that the oil market, especially in the beginning, was a very rough market, and we need to make sure that we are treated better than people and on the old oil market. When we talk about Internet of Things, it's especially to support design and control of data flows. So make sure that data is not just flowing because some people are trying to put devices together and didn't understand them. but that is really designed. And the other thing is users and customers need to be protected. I don't know how much you ever try to reconfigure your Hoover or your fridge and as an IoT device. More needs to be done there. And from that point of view, and that is for users, but also for researchers and for regulators, and understand all of them are sitting here, and IFAB is working with all of them, and CLEI is working with all of them. Watch data flows carefully and look whether certain applications, do they need the data and are they worth the data? So thanks a lot to the people in our research project who supported me with that talk. And with that, I will leave that for later for other data flows. And I look forward to comments, questions, anything that you may want to say. Muchas gracias. And Gabriela, you're muted. I cannot hear you.
Hi. Thank you very much for your presentation. It was really, really interesting. Please, people, you can post questions in the questions and answers or in the chat. I will start asking you a question and telling you something that's pretty interesting in Costa Rica right now. The thing is, we have not as much Internet of Things going around. Houses are starting to have some devices, but we are having a really good discussion in the newspapers right now because of the certificates of being vaccinated for COVID. The thing is, the government is producing some QR things in which we are supposed to show to all the places we are going in. But the problem is that the government doesn't have the technology to produce as many QRs as fast as we are expecting, because they are asking us to present them in the next month. So all Costa Ricans are crazy getting all the information into the system and asking for the QR. It took me like 2 weeks to get mine. And now a company, a software company, is offering his expertise to produce all the QRs. So the government was really, really happy, saying, great, now we can pass all the responsibility to this company that's gonna do it for free. But then everybody started really mad because all the information of all of us will be sent to this company, and we don't know how this information is going to be handled. So imagine this company having all the information of our vaccination and of probably of a system that's called EDUS, that resumes all our health problems.
And COVID, so COVID doesn't have very many good effects, but if maybe people get aware, that sounds like an interesting learning experience. Mm-hmm. And one question would be that sometimes people are asking is this company regulated by Costa Rica policies, or is it a company that is sending data somewhere else and nobody in Costa Rica would know where the data is? In Costa Rica would know where the data is going to. Does at least the government know something?
It's Costa Rican, and the data would stay here. The problem is there's a law that forbids the government to give our information to a private company.
Okay, and at all, okay, that and there is no provision like if the company qualifies, because that is what we have in the whole.it scenarios. If a company qualifies, or if somebody qualifies, of course, and if you know it's for good purpose, that would be something. One element in the discussion, I don't know, has there been a discussion maybe on which data are really needed? What is this COVID app actually needed for? This code? Is it for getting you access to the restaurant in future to show that you're not infecting other people?
To all public places. If you want to go into, for example, a restaurant or the movies or supermarket, you have to show that you are vaccinated.
And so, but that means in principle, it would be good enough. We're doing this analysis now together that I think needs to happen much more often. So that means basically what the only information that would be needed would be to say, hey, you're vaccinated. So you would need to have a certificate that you're vaccinated, and that certificate should maybe show up on your smartphone or on a piece of paper, and then you can show that. That is basically the goal.
Yeah, that's the goal. The problem is who's going to produce all the QRs?
All the QRs.
Is the government or is the private institution?
Company.
And the government has no ability. In fact, systems are going down all the time every time you ask for your QR.
Okay, so that maybe it's more safe to basically get a stamp when you got your vaccination and shows a paper stamp.
Yeah,
or maybe have an app. Again, that's interesting because there was some grassroots movement in some countries, including Germany, to say, hey, if we have couldn't we produce something that is reading a vaccination certificate, and that is creating and if it's only a simple copy of it or a digital signature produced by a doctor, and that can be then produced and shown on the smartphone. And then we don't need to do it all via one central system, but it can be done in a more decentralized fashion. Of course, it's not trivial because it can be forged.
Yeah, in fact, that's why the government is so picky trying to produce the QRs, because they believe that all Costa Ricans are going to force the system and are going to simulate that they're vaccinated without being vaccinated.
And the government, but the company is now using it, even though the data were not supposed to go to a company anywhere, but now they're arriving at the company.
Yeah, so there's a whole debate of if the government had done something that's illegal, what do we do with it?
Yes, I think this is a good learning experience for future activities. Think about the next element, that you have data in school. I mean, another example, which is not directly IoT, but somehow relation, is quite a few schools are using MS Teams or Zoom as tools to do on home education, or we're doing that when we had the lockdown scenarios. And the data protection officer was looking at that and said, hey, where are the Zoom and Teams data actually are going to? And it turns out, well, they are actually stored in all kinds of places, and it's not so easy to control them. So the data protection officer has said, and we were not going to tolerate use of Zoom and Teams in schools as long as we have a proper strategy that the data are being in a space where they can be guaranteed that they're not being misused. And that means, for example, US with some of the issues of secret services accessing clouds would not be in there. So now Teams and Zoom are trying to build up European data centers and showing that the data are not leaving Europe, for example, or not leaving the country. The next question, of course, is where is the software coming and who's managing these data centers? How independent are the data centers from the software that is being managed from somewhere? So that's another example for data flow. That, of course, is then when, let's say, next time the government wants to manage some healthcare data, or maybe for the next vaccination also, is to be considered. But and don't know whether it's good news for you. Many governments are at the moment standing to some degree helpless in front of it. One element, I think one of the reasons for this CyberSec for Europe things is actually because that the countries and the governments and the parliaments have said, hey, we need to make sure that as a country, we're not losing out on understanding what's happening. And we need to understand more what is happening, and devices that we don't understand, we should invest in understanding more. And what is also found out is that in single countries in Europe are not able to do it. One needs to work together and to gain the transparency, and at least there's a learning curve for that. That's maybe a good message in this.
Yeah, in fact, it is really crazy. The thing is, we had a student that was doing some research and was tracking the packets that went out of his house through very simple IoT devices. For example, the microphone that was taking care of a baby. And so he found out that the packets of that device were going to India, China, Korea. It's impressive because why are they sending so much packages? And he asked the companies, what are you using the information of a baby in a house and going all the way there? And they were answering that they needed that information to check that the device was working or not.
That is one of the typical excuses, and the especially issue with toys and household devices is that these companies usually invest only, let's say, maybe 5% into the software stack that they have. Sometimes they're trying to get the cheapest software that is possibly available, and then you have these kind of results. Indeed, that's just trying to come back here eventually to the page with the household devices that we have. There has been a testing on toys by a consumer protection organization in Norway, and they found lots of these examples that you've just described, where these toys are delivering data and to all places that, and sometimes not even the manufacturer has fully understood, because this is where the software value chain comes in. Very often the software that the household device manufacturers are using is not software that they're programming, they're downloading it somewhere. Maybe they're downloading it from one of the big social networks or so, which offer programming and programming interfaces and programming environments for these devices. And of course, when you use one of these programming environments, then guess where your test data are going and guess where the real data are going. So indeed, showing more what is happening is important. And when it comes to this example of the toys, some of these toys were now banned from the market. Whether that will, of course, that is not so easy to have, but we will see more of that. For example, this thing, for example, was transferring children's talk to a server somewhere, and basically it's the cheapest place where the manufacturer was interested in to give speech and recognition and do speech recognition and give an automated answer.
But that's really, really dangerous. People are not aware of how dangerous it is. The thing is, the security through the lines is not as secure as one can believe. Okay.
Yes. Also, this device was designed for looking beautiful. It was not designed for having proper encryption and stuff in it. And of course, it's much cheaper than many smartphones. It is. Yes. Again, this created a public an outcry in several countries in Europe, and in some countries this thing was taken from the market. But we may see more of that. So, quick question: What is it? Task here for professionals like CLEI and organized in CLEI and IFIP. And I think one point is we need to ask for much more transparency for these kind of things. A good example where things were working reasonably well, but the industry didn't like it at all, were the smart meters. You've seen the smart meter analysis that I've presented. That was input to an analysis on how should a smart meter designed and should be able to understand a smart meter and how much protection goes into a smart meter for electricity. And that is kind of okay now. But if you talk to the people who wanted to sell smart meters cheaper, and they were not happy. Money is a big factor here, I must say.
Yeah, I can believe it. We have a question from Jonathan Salazar. Can you see it in the question and answers?
No.
Below? Well, I can read it. It says, there's a big increase in the phishing cases in Costa Rica. Can you give us some advice on how detecting and protecting us from this type of attacks? And maybe if you have a page where we can practice the detection of phishing?
So I think the best advice is basically when you receive an email or when you receive, and nowadays it's not only email, it can also be a WhatsApp message. And it can be any kind of electronic communication that you receive, and you're not really sure where it comes from. You want to be careful, and in email that means you want to look into where does the address that is written big maybe on your mail program, does it actually match what is in the protocol of the email in the mail header? If you have a chance to look that, for as in Outlook, for example, something is displayed big to you and somewhere you find the real address. And comparing that already would help against, let's say, 80% of the phishing spam. The next thing is, if somebody is asking for you for putting information in after they send you an email, that is already a reason to be very suspicious. And best idea is, and if somebody sends you email and asks you to click on something and put data in, and that's maybe also something you want to tell your mother, don't do it. And look, is that a company that I'm working with? Are they important for me? And then you go to the website of that company, but on your own. And then you type in whatever, dhl.com or fedex.com or Costa Rica Parcel Service.com, and then you start typing something in. One must say that, of course, many of these people are very skilled in psychology. So what they usually do is they try to create situations when you are in stress. When you're in stress, avoid giving out personal data. A typical stress scenario is a message arrives maybe on your smartphone, and the mail says, there is this wonderful parcel. There's a million of euro for you available. There is a free smartphone that is coming in a lottery. Just click on this and put in your data. Usually when it's too good to be true, and it looks like it's actually too good to be true, and when it looks wonderful, then it is too good to be true. So the first point is avoid stress, and especially avoid entering data in stress, which is not easy. But it's difficult. I try to dig out some advice, and most of the pages that I know are German speaking only, but I try to dig out one on it, and then I maybe can put it and can send it to you, Gabriela, and you can maybe publish it somewhere. That is probably the best. I understand English or Spanish would be the preferred languages, correct?
Yeah, sure.
Yes. Now, consumer protection is very often a national thing. That's why very many of these things are in Germany. But there is there is an anti-spam coalition. I'll look up for something.
Thank you very much. There's no more questions. And we're about time, 1 hour from when we started. So Kai, thank you very much for your presentation. I want to remind you that he is a keynote from IFEP, and that IFEP is celebrating its 60th anniversary. There are lots of activities going around, and they're for free. So you're really welcome to try to go into the IFEP website and find some of these activities. I don't know if you want to say something about the 60th anniversary, Kai?
Certainly. I mean, IFEP, and as Gabriela has already explained, was there for the international collaboration. And for many of these things, international collaboration is important. Again, one of the examples was, if we want to get better smartphone and app stores, we need to join forces together, because otherwise we're not in a negotiating power. And IFEP is trying to give advice on these kind of activities. And that's actually also one of the IFEP Jubilee events, and that deals with security and with security education. You find that on the IFEP website. I think it's at about a 1 week or two. Unfortunately, I don't know by heart at the moment the exact end date for that. But see IFEP as an example, and working with CLEI to make sure that when alone we are not strong enough, and in a bigger alliance we can achieve more. And that holds both for science, it holds for professionals, but it holds usually for those who are not necessarily big enough and by themselves. And IFEP has a lot of topics where this holds. Security and privacy is just one topic. That is IFEP TC11 and TC9. If it's user interfaces and games, then it would be TC13 and TC14 for you. Virtually every area that CLEI is covering, I would assume, is also covered by IFEP. And many of these Jubilee events have brought together quite a few very good people. IFEP.org Jubilee. And so IFEP.org as a website, and then the 60s and Jubilee page is something that shows you this.
Thank you very much, Kai. Just to remind you that CLEI is a member of IFEP. So whatever activities are done by IFEP, you are invited, and you have some discount on the conference.
You get a discount. You get a 10% discount as a CLEI member, yes. Sometimes more, but at least 10. Okay.
Thank you very much. They are asked me to finish. So thank you for coming to us. Next time, I hope you are coming to Costa Rica, but this time it's only virtual. Thank you, Kai, for all your insight. Thank you to everybody.
And thanks a lot for the friendly invitation and all of your interest.
Okay, thank you.
I suppose they're taking us off from the big screen.
Okay, I'm not sure. I am asking.
Are we still visible? Where I can try to exchange the slides and now the screen sharing.
So I guess we have to go out.
Okay, then let's go out.
Okay, thank you, Kai.
Thank you.